Good morning. Welcome to Full Circle with Tessa Dooms. I'm Tessa Dooms, and I'll be taking you through the next hour of Full Circle. We will be talking all things politics, all things society, and what needs to change in our society in order to create a better tomorrow and a better future. As you know, this is a partnership between the Rivonia Circle and the Insights Show, and we're really happy to, every few weeks, bring you some conversations about how we understand the role of politics in our society, how we understand the role of different political actors, and how we understand the changes that are shifting in our society. Every week, there's almost something new to think about and reflect on. And so this is the show where we learn together, we grow together, we share together, and we reflect on what kind of South Africa we want to build, the South Africa 2.0 of our dreams. So this morning, I'm really privileged to have with me this morning Deputy Minister Buti Manamela. And he's here in his capacity as a political activist this morning. So I'm going to try and not ask him things related to higher education. But this morning we're going to be talking about the question about the role of political parties in between elections. So many people only interface with a political party, if ever, during an election. The majority of South Africans are not necessarily members of political parties, and we sometimes don't think about that much. But for the most part, a lot of us hear about political parties, see them once every 5 years. We also know that there are hundreds of political parties in our country. At the last local government elections, we had 325 parties that participated in the local government elections. And so clearly, political parties are not dying. They're not going anywhere in our society. But we need to ask, what role do they play other than ask us for our vote? What role do they play other than create campaigns? We need to understand, is there a way that political parties can shift and change our society in different ways than what they've done before? So this morning, as we get into it, we're going to be talking to, I'm not going to call him Minister, Deputy Minister this morning. I'm not going to call you DN this morning. I'm just going to say to the political activist Buti. And we're going to just talk about the role of politics and political parties. But I wanted to start at a place close home to you, about your own political journey. So how did you get into politics?
Oh, okay, that's nakabod mina. I suppose and thank you very much for having me. And I think this is quite a good initiative. The engagement about what role political parties should be playing, because many people see or get to experience and interact with political parties, mostly during elections, because a lot of resources are investment. I mean, I invested in marketing and door-to-door and all sorts of things, but I think that's for another day. But, well, how I got into politics, that was, I wouldn't say by accident, because I think it was more of what was happening at the time. I think my first conscious political act was when I was 13. There was the whole build-up towards, we building up towards elections. Nelson Mandela is going to be released. But also there was a lot of turmoil in the country at the time. And, most of the things that were happening, it was open political protest and acts which were further wanting to weaken the apartheid state. So, so an uncle of mine, Lassie, he invited me over to a meeting. And it turned out that it wasn't going to be a meeting. We're actually going to burn down a municipality
at
building.
13?
Yeah.
You were 13?
Yeah.
Wow, was that?
A municipality building, a police station, and there was just general riot. And, that night, I also think I didn't have a choice, because that night, the police were raiding each and every house. Any young boy of my age, I was a bit taller, so you could have mistaken me for anything else, was going to be arrested. And I think I remember I spent half the night, of course, we're protesting, and then we're running around away from the police. I spent half the night sleeping on top of a shack, and then when we were about to be caught, got off, ran into one of the neighbors' shack, and the police came knocking. And the lady who was staying in that house, I remember this quite vividly. So she opened the door, and then she was in the nude. She just took off her clothes and then opened the door and said to the police, "What do you want?" And then they were just so embarrassed to be seeing a naked woman, and they're like, "Sorry, ma'am, sorry, we're just looking for some naughty boys." And then they closed the door and they left. And from there it just went on. Started attending meetings of the youth league, got involved in organizing COSAS activities in school, but also more in the art. I mean, we're highly influenced by some of the poets at the time who were mostly advocating the struggle through poetry. It could have been, protest poetry. So I also got a bit involved in that because I thought it was quite an important platform. But I was more focused on that, and also trying to balance the role of the student youth movement, but also the religious section, because I was quite active in church, in the youth section. And I was also asking problematic questions in church, that we cannot just be bystanders. So in a nutshell, that's how I got involved, and here we are.
So it's not this glamorous romantic story of the leader rises from the ashes, and there's a lot of
not at all. And I think those formative years. I mean, of course, I'm not proud of the fact that what I refer to as the first political act was basically bringing to ash a public building, but it is what that building represented. At the time, I think it was also the adrenaline and the excitement of being involved in such an activity. But and to date, both the local police station and the civic offices that we burned down are not operating.
Wow.
But more because of what happened post 1994. So from that protest, we were, I think, part of the. I'm quite excited to have been part of the first generation, even if I didn't get to vote in 1994, that was in a way involved in the mobilization of people to go out and vote. And I don't think at the time there was so much investment in getting people out from their houses, because it represented a period of hope. People knew that this is what needed to be done in all fronts. I mean, all South Africans came out to go and vote at the time, irrespective of how much investment was made in the political campaigning process, because it was almost the unification. Well, people at the time, and I mean, I wasn't even conscious of what this meant in the long term. All I knew was that the ANC had to win. Mandela has to be president. But the fact that it represented the prospect of some level of unity, of peace, but also of drastically changing the conditions which people were living under at the time, and that's why people went out to vote. So I'm quite excited to have been part of that. But thinking about it now, I don't think any 13-year-old should be plunged into that type of a situation where they have to, go and burn down some building in the township.
Sure, but I mean, I think even today there are young people who are being put into those situations. Yep. Just yesterday in Tembisa, yep. Young people lost their lives protesting, yep. and that says something about our current situation not being dramatically different yep. from our previous, our history in our past. Yep. And maybe before we get into, the main topic around political parties, it's important for us to reflect on whether we think people should become more politically active and what that should look like. How do young people, particularly and individuals, start seeing themselves as not just, the boy who's sitting at home, playing with your cousins or your parents or whatever you were doing at the time, to somebody taking political action? How do we start to encourage that in ways that are progressive, in ways that are productive, in ways that build, in ways that don't cause, people to have to lose their lives?
Yeah. Look, our history is obviously has a lot to play with the way in which, communities are going to express their political views. And I think in most instances it has become protest. It has become expressing anger, by touching down public institutions. And it speaks to something else. It speaks to the fact that maybe gradually people are really losing hope in political institutions, meaning your parliament, your provincial legislatures, and your local council, in meeting their immediate needs. Secondly, that they feel disempowered, that their voices are not being heard, and that the conditions that they find themselves in seems to be permanent. And of course, these are, it's almost the same population group or population groups that are still affected by, these conditions as in 1994. But of course, the monster has changed and has evolved. But as long as people do not get a sense that they are being represented by any of the political parties that put their names on the ballot, they would definitely protest in the manner in which we've seen them do in Tembisa and all over the country. And I think people are or have become almost innately political animals, because it's not only the product of your work that guarantees your subsistence, but if you see politics as a platform within which work can become available, or your own subsistence can become available, you obviously become a political animal. What does Marx say? Men must first eat, drink, sleep, have shelter before they pursue politics, philosophy, and all of that. But these two things are interconnected, because how you gather your food, how you get to secure your shelter, and how you get your clothes determines your political and philosophical outlook. I do not see anyone from Sandton, which is across the street from Alexandra, or from Tembisa, seeing what the people in Tembisa are doing as justifiable, precisely because their future is guaranteed, their next meal is guaranteed. And I think that as old as political institutions and political parties have been, they obviously need constant renewal for them to be able to. And when I mean constant renewal, it's not in the context of just paying lip service to restructuring these institutions so that they're accessible to people and people's voices are heard, but also the connection between what they say and the actions that we take in government in order to meet those basic needs, interests, and aspiration. But also the other disconnect, I think, is in that, because of the nature within which apartheid was structured, because it was guaranteeing social security for a certain section of the population. Post-1994, the government of the day took it upon its shoulders to then broaden, that social security, and in a sense disempowered or in a way that disempowered communities to also contribute into their own development. I mean, if you look at the RDP-based document, if you look at the ANC's first elections manifesto, it was more about the commitment that the ANC government is going to do. And I think it began to disconnect what people who, took it upon themselves to, contribute into fighting against apartheid. It wasn't Mandela alone. It wasn't Oliver Tambo alone. Who were in Robben Island. I think it's the conversation I was having with the kids when I went to Robben Island a week or two ago, and one of them said, did they build this entire institution just to incarcerate Nelson Mandela? But when we got there, they began to realize that hundreds and thousands of people actually contributed in bringing down apartheid into its knees. And I think it should have taken the same energy to help in contributing towards building a new South Africa without relying on the central government or without relying on the benevolence of, the Madiba magic, as it was called at the time.
I mean, you remind me of the idea that the personal is political, and that people's political energy actually comes from a reflection on their lives.
Exactly.
And that part of, becoming politically active is a response to your life. So in that 94 moment, and I think we've said it on this platform now, maybe every time we've met, there's this conversation in society that maybe at that 94 moment, what we did as a society is we gave over our political action and our political agency and our political abilities into the hands of the state, into the hands of a few political parties of the day. And we didn't, as communities, stay plugged in. And I think that does take us nicely into this question about then, what has become the role of the political party in a democratic South Africa? So, I mean, the ANC particularly, and you're part of the alliance as part of the SSCP, but the alliance and the ANC often talk about, the movement, being a liberation movement, Is that still something that they can say they are today? Or has their role in society effectively shifted? And is there now a need for a new liberation movement, or is there another liberation movement already at play? But I think we should just start talking about, what does it mean to be a liberation movement versus to be in government as a political party? What did that shift mean for the character of politics?
Look, my view is that I think reference to the ANC as a liberation movement, or anyone within the alliance, or reference to any political party in South Africa as a liberation movement, is only nostalgic. The ANC has evolved into an electoral political party, and of course there is that that transition that the past is still pulling it back. It's still a mass party, it's still a protest party in certain communities, and even probably more vocal, where the ANC has become an opposition party. But to refer to it or any political party post-liberation, as a liberation movement, it can only be nostalgic. But it also means that you do not appreciate the fullness of the kind of challenges that you faced with, moving forward. Yes, for instance, policy-making processes in the ANC pre-1994, if you think about Kliptown, the Freedom Charter, which the ANC ultimately adopted, or if you think about, some of the kind of strategies and tactics the ANC adopted in the past. Yes, of course, there were a few intellectuals who gathered around the table, but there was an effort to popularize what all of those meant. But I think more importantly that the struggle for liberation was not going to be a struggle conducted by a few individuals, but that it required a movement. It required the mobilization of the entire society to appreciate and be in one with that kind of a vision. And I would characterize 1994 not only as post-apartheid, but also as post-liberation. and it presenting new challenges. Firstly, a challenge of the ANC and the broader alliance accepting that, it's no longer only about, protest, but it's more about governing. It's more about, taking the responsibility for, completely building a new society from what the apartheid system represented. But also I think understanding that contesting for elections in a capitalist society means that you have to crudely be a political party. And it doesn't mean that the values that you upheld as you were a liberation movement does not need to continue and characterize what you've become as a new political party that's contesting for elections. But I think it would be nostalgic and denial if we continue to refer to the ANC is a post-liberation movement. It is a political party, and I think we see also in the way within which we interact internally within the party as activists, the way in which people jog for elected positions, the way people position themselves to occupy different positions in government, but also what gets done in between. The preoccupation is about getting people to the polls in the next election and ensuring that those people vote for your political party. That's purely what a political party is, all about. So I think that distinction is important. I actually wrote something for internal discussion about it, about the fact that our continued denial of the fact that we are now a political party facing new conditions and also having new responsibilities would mean that we would rob ourselves that frankness of this new responsibility and the challenges that it comes with.
And then I think let's talk about the SACP. But you've come from, I imagine, a few conference weeks in succession with the SACP National Conference, back to back with the policy conference of the ANC. But I mean, you say that the political party's role is to contest, but you're in a political party that doesn't contest. So, the SACP has decided not to contest, decided to go into an alliance with the ANC. In that context, what was the motivation around the SACP coming into an alliance, giving up its ability to come into a post-liberation contest with the ability to contest? Yeah. And, has it then ceded all of its political power to the ANC by doing that?
Well, not necessarily. I think, firstly, the case of the SACP over the last, 20, 25 years is a good illustration of what political parties should be and could be doing in between elections. Firstly, I think the ability of the SACP for this period to have been able to mobilize communities around issues on land, issues on the financial sector, and I think at some point, the SACP was almost synonymous with fighting against the credit bureau and people being listed, but also programs and campaigns such as Know Your Neighborhood, whose intention was to say in communities where SACP structures exist, that we've got to take responsibility as communities, to complement whatever work that local government is doing, to keep our communities clean, to make sure that, in households where they qualify for social grants, they have access to those. Households where they qualify for financial aid scheme, for an ID. I mean, we ran, I think, one of the most successful ID campaigns which, pushed Home Affairs to begin to rethink their systems after one of the young people held Home Affairs officials at Ranzo. And it was interesting how all of these campaigns resonated with communities because they realized that it is not only about what government does, but it's also about the challenges posed by decisions taken in the corporate and private sector, and that through their action, which are not necessarily destructive actions. It could have been through protests, it could have been through meetings with local Home Affairs officials, it could have been engaging the private sector, the financial sector itself, banks and so forth, that you can actually get things moving. And so the SACP's own political activism and activity over the last 20 to 25 years, I think, has not only been narrowly about campaigning for the ANC during elections, but it has also been about building a solid base. And I think we've witnessed an organic growing of the SACP's membership, not because we went all out and said, you come join, and all of that, but because we got people involved into campaigns and activities that were not necessarily electoral, but which were also having an impact on their immediate lives. And so now coming to the whether we're ceding that power to the ANC, I think the appreciation is that we are part of the alliance with the ANC and with COSATU, and that our immediate goal and our long-term goal somewhat are in unison. Our goal ultimately is for a socialist South Africa, and that there's an interconnectedness between building a democratic society, building a non-racist, non-sexist society, with ultimately building a socialist future. And yes, of course, there are differences all the time, and some of those differences are about fundamental things about how we move South Africa forward. Are they, they're about whether we should privatize Eskom and SAA or not, and what would be in the best interest of the country, and a whole range of other things. But I think crucially, what the SACP's own Congress, which said about 2 to 3 weeks ago, said was that in the current context, we do not think, in as much as it may seem urgent for the SACP to contest for elections and become one of the political parties in parliament, but we think that we can still do much of an impact working within communities, doing the work that we've been doing, but also that we believe that if certain things get done, which we continue to engage the ANC on, if certain things get done, then we will shorten the route towards a socialist South Africa. We're not oblivious to some of the problems that are confronting the ANC, some of the problems that we're confronted with in society, but we still believe that a package of the alliance is probably the best political solution for the challenges that our country is facing.
I mean, it sounds like the SACP lives, which is not always, the view we have from the outside. But maybe part of that reason why the SACP's impact and its growth and all of those things are hidden from public view is because of this marriage with the ANC and, the ANC's dominance in that role. But people may also say, that the SACP has only stayed in this alliance because it gives it an easier route into governance. People have accused, the likes of Blade and Zamande and others of political careerism themselves in saying you're just holding on to this so that you have an easier seat into the table. That question of political careerism, I think, is a real one, just not only in the alliance, but across the political spectrum. You raised it earlier. Has politics really just become one of those places in society where it's not necessarily about impact? It's about positions, it's about careers, it's about finances, it's about people's livelihoods, and people are joining because of access rather than because of principle and because of what it is that it means to work as a political activist in community.
Look, it's a combination of factors. And I think, firstly, look, there are very few communists who are in government. And I think if that was the major motivation, the SACP would have long, created its own electoral platform. In fact, we've had resistance in certain districts and in certain municipalities where the SACP went on, members of the SACP went on to contest independent outside of the, and I think the one most recent case was Metsimaholo, where we had for the first time ever, outside of the ANC, a mayor who was a member of the SACP, and the majority of councillors were members of the SACP. Now, and I think the big issue around, whether should we contest elections at a massive scale or not, is precisely that we're quite worried that some of the reasoning behind is because people believe that their careers are curtailed if you're in the SACP and the SACP is not contesting for elections and all of that. And I think it will not be for genuine reasons. But secondly, yes, people join political parties for completely different reasons. People move from one political party to another in order to continue, not with the interest of people as would purport to, but in the interest of protecting positions that they hold. If you think about it, most of the political parties that fractured out of the ANC, you can talk about COPE, you can talk about, I think the earliest one was the UDM, COPE, and so on and so forth. That most of those political parties and the individuals or personas behind those political parties, their intention was mainly to continue their political careers, and not about, what they believed are continuing with people's causes. And so that could be one of the reasons. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why, you have a rise in corruption, for instance, where people join only to think about what will go into my pocket as opposed to what impact will I make generally in society. But I also think that you have a whole lot of activists whose preoccupation is about helping communities from the basest of things, and they may not only exclusively be in the South African Communist Party or in the ANC, but they could be across all political parties. But I suppose when it seems out there, when all that we hear is this politician and their hand in the cookie jar, and that being what defines politics. That's the kind of perception that people will hold about what political parties are and what political activism is. And so we, then tend to, and that's the reality that we live in, wherein we intend to elect people not on the basis of their proven track record, working within communities, working within the party, but sometimes on the basis of how deep their pocket is, and whether they are going to be able to sway, branches to be able to vote for them.
And I want us to get into the conversation about conferences and political gatherings and all of that in between the voting period. But just want to remind everybody that we're in conversation this morning with Buti Manamela from the SACP, and we're talking about the role of political parties in between elections. So when you're not campaigning, what is the point of having political parties? Please share your thoughts, share your comments, share your views. Let's interact, let's engage. Let's think about how we imagine a better South Africa with political parties, or maybe without. Who knows? But the question about conferencing and swaying people and being able to be elected. The ANC finds itself in a conference here. The SACP finds itself in a conference here. NUMSA and SAFTU, and I can't remember what that collective is called, finds itself in conference here. Tom Eaton wrote an interesting piece this week where he said, maybe the ANC is too busy, distracted by its conferencing.
Yeah.
It can't govern effectively because it's so busy with and distracted by its own internal machinations. And it's something we've heard in different forms. People saying, the ANC's factionalism means that it can't attend to governance issues. You have compromised people in government because they're making political decisions rather than what's best for governance. On the other hand, you have other political parties who are showing up in society in different ways as well. So I want us just to reflect on the broad spectrum. Yeah. The EFF has had a year of, I'm calling it the rally after rally year. I don't think I've seen a week in the last 2 to 3 months without the EFF holding some kind of convening in society. We've seen the rise of kind of the PA. And the PA, besides just Gate and McKenzie, taking this very 100-day approach, action-oriented, you're seeing the rise of organization building and people doing activism and soup kitchens here and CETA engagements there. So, we have this broad range. What's the right kind of mix of things that a party should be doing? And I mean, I think, for instance, a party like Action SA that's not in government might have a very different approach to their political program than somebody like the ANC or the DA who are in government. What do you think the right mix should be, whether you're in government or not, to have an effective political party that adds value to our society? Yeah.
Look, I mean, the conferences are an essential lifeblood of political parties, because you have to know what your policies are internally as an organization, but also the policies that you are going to be advocating to have an impact in society, which is what the NC's policy conference is all about. As to whether that will work out or not, I think it's something that we'll have to see with time. But we think that we have successfully managed to make a distinction. Of course, now and then there is that overreach, but a successful distinction between the political party, the ANC, and government on the other hand.
Separation of party and state.
Exactly, and I think if you want to say if the party continues with its own activities, government will suffer. I think it's as good as saying if we have a new political party, government will suffer. Of course, there may be changes that are brought in by a new political party, but I think what we've seen all around, even in cases where the DA has replaced the ANC, we've almost seen a similar type of things, because you can only do so much, and that government in its intactness continues. But I think
just before you continue, I mean, there was an interesting proposal made by the ANC Youth League that perhaps, to strengthen that separation between party and state, that part of the NEC and part of a political leadership in government, half of it should stay in the party and half of it should be deployed in government. So you really have an accountability of your deployees by the party continuing. Do you think something like that helps that? Do you think it's possible? Or do you think that leads to the two centers of power type thing?
I don't think that political parties should take responsibility for making government account. I think that communities and society should have that responsibility to make elected officials account, because what it would mean if I can only go and account to the SG of my political party, then it means, I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is to write a fancy report to my SG and say, this is what I've done. Whereas within communities, there's absolutely no impact. So probably a combination of the two. The other reality is that, big political parties are fading. Yes. The EFF is gunning for 1 million membership. The ANC has had, I think, more than 1 million members for quite some time. The SACP's target is 1%. Our membership should be 1% of the South African population. But the reality is that if you do not define what a member should be doing, with time, it means that all I am is just someone who subscribes, signs up, and
gave you my 20 rand.
Exactly. And so part of the things that we're discussing at the SACP Congress was, what do SACP members, the more than 400,000 of them, and branches, do on a day-to-day basis? What are the activities that they're doing within their communities? It could be filling up potholes. It could be calling the councillor to, fix water in the neighborhood. It could be those basic activities that have an impact on the immediate in people's lives. And I think that, if we see political parties in that way, not as an electoral franchise, as is the case in the United States, which has a long history, in fact, the origin of political parties emerging from there. But if we do not see political parties as an electoral franchise, but more as institutions that are based within communities and by communities, and become somewhat of a mouthpiece of communities. I mean, someone raised quite a crucial point in one of the discussions at the conference, which is just on the sidelines, that you had protest in Soweto, which almost led to violent targeting foreign nationals, and the ANC or the SACP or any of the alliance structures were not visible in there, or you caught up by surprise in terms of protest in the same townships, focusing on electricity, or but that structures are not really involved. And I think that that's probably the bigger problem, wherein if you institutionalize accountability, what the branch does is, as long as we appease the regional and provincial leadership and national leadership, that's all we have to do. And the patronage is also exchanged. I don't want to go hard on the branch because my election at the next Congress depends on that. So I think an assessment of what political activists, be it in government or anywhere else, or in their own political parties, a proper assessment of the kind of impact those activists are doing should rather come from communities and be endorsed by communities. And so that's why the ANC's approach towards in the last local government elections was, we need councillor candidates who are a product of their communities. That communities should be encouraged as much as possible to nominate ANC councillor candidate for them to say, so that those should be the people who determines whether you're really their community leader or not, and not some sub-regional or regional leadership who may owe you some patronage, or you'll be beholden to them for some patronage.
Yeah, so I derailed you a bit from that question about what makes for a good mix of activities.
Oh yes, yeah. So in fact, it's exactly part of that. It's exactly being within communities, and in the case of those political parties that contest for elections, without being limited to, look, it could be the DA that says we having a wine.
You don't know what the DA does. You can't.
A wine and cheese gathering in wherever, or it could be the EFF that says we're having a rally, and that the rally is about
on Fanon's birthday.
On Fanon's birthday, or on the July 26 movement's anniversary. It can be any of those things. But I think if the intention is solely for the purpose of electoral franchise, I think it just defeats the purpose, because any political party that doesn't make an impact, I know I shouldn't be, acknowledging what
Others are doing.
but I think that where Patriotic Alliance, Gayton and crew. If I think part of the bigger challenge has been, those councillors, because there are thousands of councillors who are doing, what the Patriotic Alliance has been doing, that some of those things need to come out. But I think that there's also a lot to learn from some of those, activities that have been happening. I hope that they are within PFMA and all of those. But the important thing for me is about impact. We shouldn't wait to determine impact at the next electoral cycle. I think that impact that political parties make, should be contest. Yes, for instance, the EFF has grown through all of these rallies and all of that, and some people are suggesting that their growth is going to be stagnated. I'm not going to be speaking as a political analyst. I think that we can have as many rallies as we want to, as we can, but if those rallies are not centered around getting people to, I think, as to do things for themselves, we might as well not, if rallies are convened just to praise the leader, then what good are those rallies for if they're not, intended to make changes within communities where those rallies are taking place?
Yeah, you talk about impact, right?
Yep.
I was of the strong view during the 2021 election when the ANC particularly was bemoaning the short period for campaigning. I said, no, not you guys.
Yeah.
Other people can bemoan campaigning cycles, not you. Because when you're the incumbent, when you're in government, when you have a seat, when you are a mayor, you're campaigning the whole time if your lodestar campaigning is impact.
Yeah.
Because then you can show impact. I mean, I think what you're saying about the Patriotic Alliance is, we can go through a fine-tooth comb with everything that's happening, but you can also say, oh, this is electioneering on the basis of impact.
Yep.
And so I think the question is, if you're in government, why is there still this focus on, trying the brand and the PR and not a question about the best way in order to stay in government is just to deliver impact? And that question could be asked as much of the DA in the Western Cape. I spent a few days in Khayelitsha and Philippi last week, where I was just astounded. I mean, it was really, really stark in my mind again at the reason why there's going to always be a split in the way in which people vote in Cape Town is because there's a split in the way in which people live and the impact of that party's governance. And so political parties need to start thinking about that impact question in governance and outside governance. I mean, the question I wanted to ask you was really about opposition politics. Because opposition politics can make the case that, you can't ask us about impact. We're not in government. You haven't voted us in. I think we've heard this from a few political parties. If you don't vote us in and give us a clear mandate, we can't deliver to you. Isn't opposition politics held to the same standard when it comes to impact? Should they not be showing impact whether they're in government or not?
No, look, most definitely. I mean, one of the most celebrated women, both in the Communist Party and in the ANC, Lillian Ngoyi, so her involvement in politics and broadly in the trade union movement wasn't about I'm holding this position, I'm going to be burning down apartheid structures and all of that. But I think it was more about mobilizing women around socio-economic activities, and in that way building consciousness. She wasn't in government. She wasn't relying on the apartheid government's patronage, but she was building people's power in the real sense by helping them to change the circumstances within which they were finding themselves in. And I think it speaks to what political parties should be. And that's why I said that over the years, over the last few years, where the SACP has preoccupied itself is how do we exist in communities, even though we're not campaigning for elections, and even though that's not our intention, but how do we exist within communities and get communities involved, in programs that they define as, moving their communities forward. And that's what basically defines the kind of programs that the SACP, has been doing. And I'm not talking about, opposition parties mobilizing school shoes or sanitary pads, which is, my two greatest passion, by the way. And I think it's more about getting those communities to work with political parties to do certain things for themselves. And, so because of our history of violent protest, which was necessitated by the violent nature of the apartheid system, that legacy still continues, wherein it almost become the next second option, to see what is happening in Tembisa, to see what happened in Soweto a couple of days ago, to see what's happening in Kaili Shalang, and in all these communities wherein people say, all right, we haven't been listened to once or twice, we're going to bend down. And, it not only speaks on the failures of the governing party, but it also speaks on the failures of opposition parties and parties that are outside of government to be able to give those communities a voice and a platform.
That's legitimate.
That's legitimate, exactly. So for me, the kind of violent protest that we've seen recently or throughout is not necessarily a failure of dialogue, but it is the waning confidence that people have in political parties and political institutions. And probably fading political parties. You mentioned how many political parties were in the ballot paper, 125.
325.
325. For me, it represents the further fractionalization of our society along political party lines. It doesn't necessarily, and I'm not advocating for a monopoly of 2 or 3 or 5 political parties. But if you have so much discontent out there, on the one hand, but you have 325 political parties being on the ballot, then you wonder, why are South Africans not having this confidence on political institutions and political parties themselves? It is precisely because we think by convening the biggest rally of them all, we have done it all. But actually what happens in a rally is the leader speaks. The people do not speak. We think that if we, have donated this or that in a community, therefore we have gratified that community and guaranteed, their vote in the next elections. That's still not enough. And that, what is important is people determining that which defines their own progress, their own development, and political parties and political institutions building that platform for them to be able to realize their own goals.
I mean, I wasn't going to ask this question, but because you've raised it so many times, I'm going to throw a curveball.
Okay.
I mean, this question of, organizing and communities doing for themselves and really participating in governance, per se.
Yeah.
Does that not lead us to having conversations about constituencies? I mean, we've got the electoral reform bill that's now on the table in your parliamentary capacity. It's on your parliamentary desk.
Yeah.
I mean, is it not time that we look at that and we really ask questions about how do we give back power to people in their constituencies?
Yeah.
Because communities are constituencies.
Yeah.
Somehow we've done it at the level of local government.
Yeah.
But when we come to national government, we're now talking about the most intricate formulas and quotas and this and that. is there an allergicness to handing back power to people through constituencies where they can say, and I've heard this a few times in the last few years, where somebody says, I'm not voting because I don't know the person.
Yeah.
I want to be able to know who that person is. I want to be able to know where they stay. I want to be able to go to them and hold them accountable myself.
Yeah.
You know, that's talking to constituencies. Is it not time that we go to a constituency-based system at national and provincial level and really just bring back power to people?
Look, actually, the origin of political parties came from constituencies. In the U.S., where between the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, and they wanted to build a power base in Congress, and therefore mobilize people on the basis of constituencies, and that tradition still continues. But does it mean people have voices beyond the vote? I think that remains the question. And the same applies at local government elections, where it's a combination of both proportional and constituency. And so what this has resulted in is the wrath of communities almost befall ward councillors. I think they take the most heat if the president, commits to restore ESCOM power generation within 24 hours, and it doesn't happen within 24 hours. They don't go to Matlambandlofu. They go to the door of their councillor. It has its own
drawbacks.
Its own drawbacks. But I think what's important is that it holds leaders accountable, because it means you'll have to explain to communities the kind of realities that you're confronted with as a local leader, and whether that will work at a national level or not, it's something else. But I think what we obviously have to look at what the challenges have been at local government, with a mixture of both proportional and constituency or ward, and what kind of lessons we can draw from that, and then see what we could do in the future. And in as much as I said that individuals shouldn't account or only account to their political parties, but that should account to communities, I think that the political party platform in the current conjuncture still remains relevant and important, in that we know, even if it takes time, we're hoping that someone will step aside, be forced by their political party or be withdrawn, or anything of that sort. But let's see what happens into the future. Is it political parties that creates a situation wherein people feel that they don't have their voice? Maybe, or maybe not. You have countries where constituency electoral politics have become the order of the day, and I think those are some of the countries where voices are the most marginalized, and where we only see political parties during elections. In fact, for instance, the United States is a typical example, where it's mostly Congress is elected by constituencies, and president candidates, of course, tying their mast behind political parties, but are seen to be independent individuals with their own, voices and platforms. But also community still remains, voiceless in those parts of the country. In fact, when communities came out to speak out in the U.S., look at what they gave us at Donald Trump.
I mean, I would not blame communities generally for the rise of Trump. That would be to obfuscate.
Of course.
But I mean, the next session of Full Circle is actually going to be on electoral reform and that question, so I don't want to exhaust it here. Okay. But I think there is a case to be made for a need for both, need for both direct representation and accountability, and party representation and accountability. And perhaps somewhere in there lies some sort of, beautiful mixture that we can come up with as a country, that's fit for purpose for us. But as we close off today, I wanted to kind of go back to where we started. As you were recounting how you got into politics, you spoke about galvanizing people around a sense of hope.
Yep.
And that 94 moment was about hope.
Yep.
It was a lot about hope. And I'm wondering, what's that ingredient look like for us today? I think I've written something today in the Maverick Citizen where I say that, we can talk about, politics needs to be practical. People just want to tap. People just wanted this. People just want that. But I think that in order to get those things, we do need a society that believes again, believes in the institutions, believes in our democracy, believes in their communities, believes in themselves, and isn't waiting for somebody else to come and fix things. How do we start to untap a new sense of hope? What does hope look like for you as a political activist going forward?
Look, I think we are in a, and I know at some point in history people thought the same, that you are in things cannot get this worse.
I would hope not.
And I think we can list some of the challenges that we've faced with as a country. And I think part of hope means that rebuilding our country in all of the things that we're confronted with would not require a messiah, just as it didn't in 1994. But we imposed that mantle on Mandela. I think rebuilding this country would require all of us, to make a contribution. If you look beyond some of the things that needs to be fixed internally in government and what government does, it also means that if you think about crime that is happening in society that's either on the rise or we mostly starting to hear of it now, but it's your neighbor, it's your street mate, it's someone that you know. If you think about someone who is unemployed, but there's hope within the community that this person can do this or that, but they're just saying, look, I'm not going to do that. So if I think for me what's important is how do we build people's capacity and confidence, and how do we ensure that government builds that platform for people to be able to contribute into building a better country and a better future. That's where the hope should lie, in the people, not in institutions, not in elected individuals, because their role is mainly to build that platform.
The hope should lie in the people. I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much. I think we went longer than I actually had anticipated, but really, really appreciate your time. And I think you are right. The hope does lie with people, and that politics doesn't have to be something that's far away, that's only the domain of electoral politics, but it's something we can do all the time. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So that brings us to the end of Full Circle with Tessa Dooms this week. And as we talk about hope, the Rivonia Circle is hosting an event on the 9th of August called the Activist Exchange. And so you can follow us on all our social media platforms at Rivonia_Circle on Twitter, Rivonia Circle on Facebook. And you can join us at the Activist Exchange. It's next week, Tuesday, at the Braamfontein precinct in the Newtown area. And there we're going to bring together hundreds of activists from across the country. We're going to be talking about politics. We're going to be talking about the big issues in our country, issues around how we take electoral reform forward, issues around how we think about technology, how we think about the ways in which entrepreneurship needs to change. And so we invite you to be a part of that, and we'll end the day with a big solidarity march to give a tribute to the 1956 women who marched onto Con Hill so that they could also get the right to vote. And so we invite you to be a part of that day. We really want to be part of inspiring that kind of hope and making sure that all of us feel like we can participate. So look out for more information on the Activist Exchange. Follow us, register, and join us next week, Tuesday. And until we see you again on Full Circle with Tessa Dooms, please stay connected as an activist and a member of our society taking us forward. Let's go.
4, 3, 2, 1, level up, level up.